So, invalid Eucharist, does it depend on apostolic succession? Gavin Orland made a video today talking about this subject, about the validity or invalidity of Protestant Eucharists and apostolic succession. And, from a Catholic perspective, from an enlightened evangelical Catholic perspective, where he would say, yes, for validity, you do need valid apostolic succession. That doesn't mean that an invalid Eucharist is therefore nothing. I mean, Pope Benedict talks about this. You can't just reduce the question simply to validity. When a Christian or a Lutheran or a Protestant prayerfully, meaningfully, devoutly takes bread and wine, thinking about the body and blood of Christ, Christ is going to be present there in some way. Can Christ work extra sacramentally to transubstantiate in the absence of a valid minister? Yes, he can. Does he do that every time a Protestant sincerely, devoutly tries to receive the body and blood despite not having valid orders? Yeah, probably not. But he does make himself present in some way with some kind of grace, at the very least in the fact that he's prompting them to sincerely and devoutly think about his body and blood and receive bread and wine in that act. But more than that as well, I would assume, from the Catholic perspective, we'd want to affirm. That's a prayer. God answers prayers. So this leads me to the point of this video. When the subject of sacramental sharing and inner communion comes up, the Catholic position today is that we can receive and others can receive from us if we have valid orders. The Eastern Orthodox can receive from us, and if the Eastern Orthodox let us, we could receive from them. But when it comes to the question of a Catholic receiving the bread and wine in a Protestant setting, the answer is always no. No. And why is that? Well, we just talked about it. They don't have a valid Eucharist. But a couple of the reasons why the answer is no is not just because they don't have a valid Eucharist, but because it could lead to scandal. If I'm receiving the bread and the wine in a Baptist, if they use wine, they might use juice, in a Baptist community, that might lead other Catholics to think, well, apostolic succession doesn't matter. You can go wherever you want to go. It's all the same. Or I could be leading the Baptists there to the same conclusion. Oh, I guess the Catholics have changed their mind and they no longer think apostolic succession matters. So there's an issue with scandal. But if we set aside the issue of scandal, is there any reason why, as a Catholic, I couldn't receive the bread and the juice, or the bread and the wine, in a Protestant community? Is there anything sinful about a Catholic or about any Christian taking simple bread and wine, not consecrated, and eating it and drinking it, thinking prayerfully about Christ's body and blood, and that I depend on his self-sacrifice, that I can only live and have spiritual life through him dying and giving me his body and blood to eat and drink and meditate and live and breathe and have faith in him and believe in him and take his sacrifice into myself? Is there anything wrong with doing that? No, that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. So if we could set aside the question of scandal, could a Catholic receive the bread and the wine in a Protestant setting? As long as the Catholic understood they don't have valid orders, so technically there's no reason to think that it's the actual sacramental presence of Christ, but to receive it as bread and wine, as just a simple symbol of Christ's body and blood, yeah, there would be nothing wrong with that. In fact, it could be a very positive spiritual experience. Especially for a Catholic who there's no Catholic parish nearby, and the only Christian community nearby is a Protestant one. And you say, well, I know it's not valid. I know there's no reason for it to think it's necessarily the sacramental body and blood, but I still want communion, and I'm going to do what I can. Here is a Christian community. They have bread and wine, and together we're going to take bread and wine, and we're going to think about the body and blood. We're going to meditate on the body and blood and receive the bread and wine, and I'm going to leave it up to Christ and to God how much of his presence he makes present for me, extra sacramentally, through this prayerful intention. Nothing wrong with that at all. That's a good thing. That's a prayerful thing. That's a devout thing to do. So I make this video because I think it kind of highlights something that maybe Gavin's video misses a little bit, which is intrinsic to an authentic Catholic position, especially an authentic contemporary Catholic position, and actually medieval as well, because there are stories in the medieval times about Catholics. There was a king who was killed, and there's a legend about this king where he was out in the forest and he had no priest or church nearby, and so he had one of his servants take a patty of just grass from the dirt and mash it up and pretend that it was the body and blood, and he received it because he wanted the body of Christ, and he just took grass and ate it, thinking about the body of Christ. Yeah, deeply Catholic story there about someone who just so desperately wants the body of Christ, they're willing to receive grass even in hope that the Lord will in some way bless them through that. So there is it's not just simply what people say, we know where the sacrament is, but we don't know where the sacrament isn't. It's also, we know that Christ is present Christ is present at least in some way where people are truly want him to be present. We know that as well. So when the Second Vatican Council talks about the communion celebrations, the Lord's Supper among Protestants, it doesn't just say, hey, this is fake. It talks about it in the church sense, talks about it like they're meaningfully celebrating the Lord's Supper in a positive manner. Like this is a blessing for them to do. So it's not, you can't just whittle it down simply to validity and invalidity. And as a Catholic, if we could set aside the issue of scandal, we could even receive an invalid, bread and wine prayerfully in a Protestant setting. And it could be a good, positive thing.